everyone, and welcome to WARNO. Today we're going to be doing a sort of tutorial video. So the important thing to recognize with this video is I'm not very experienced in WARNO. I mean, I have a little over 150 hours, but I've been playing Eugen system games for since Ruse came out, right? I mean, I've spent a lot of my teenage years and early 20s playing these very RTSs, so I think there's some things I can impart that may be useful if you're a new player trying to learn some of the systems of this game. I'm not trying to claim to be an expert or to know the best or anything, but I think there is a lot that I can kind of teach that will take dozens, if not hundreds of hours to learn if you were just doing it by trial and error. So the first thing we're going to do is go into the armory here, and we're going to go to battle groups and create. We're going to be creating a battle group off of the Berliner Gruppierung, and I'm going to be doing this to showcase some of the units in this game and how they work, as well as getting into the sort of, I guess, opportunity cost or cost benefit of various units, right? So something to recognize in WARNO is, I would say at least, there really isn't a one-size-fits-all deck. I think the closest you get, again, in my opinion, is Berliner Gruppierung, because you get artillery, you get, and I mean good artillery, right? With the giant logistics tab, you get some good tanks, not a lot of them, but if you keep them alive, it keeps you in the fight against, say, you know, a player playing as an armored division, right? It's enough to where you can fight back. And you have a really great infantry tab. The only thing that's really kind of cheeks, I guess, is helicopter and air. There's nothing really special here, you know. No laser-guided bombs or anything, but these Su-17s and Su-24s are not terrible or anything. And you do get 2 Mi-24Ps. Anyway, before I get too off topic, we're going to start in Logistics tab. So how this game works is, if you've watched any of my previous videos, you know that I like to use a lot of artillery whenever I can. When units take damage, when they move, when they fire off their ammunition, they need to resupply. They won't automatically heal up or resupply or anything like that. You need to bring them. Either need to bring them back to the fob, which I wouldn't recommend unless you're talking about artillery or helicopters, or more realistically, if you're talking about frontline units or you have your artillery a decent ways from your fob, you want to send a supply truck or a helicopter to go and meet them. So when you click on one of these units, say we're looking at the MTLB munition right here, you see on the bottom right where it says supply. This individual MTLB is going to carry 500 supply, which is a decent bit, but it's not enough to resupply like a battery of artillery or something. So you really, in my opinion, you don't want to use the MTLB for supplying your artillery or even your helicopters. What I like using the MTLB for is, take a look at this. This is our next supply unit, the T813. It has 2,000 supply each, 81 kilometers, 100 kilometers road speed, so it's a lot faster than the MTLB and it carries a lot more supply. But look at this, on the bottom right, maximum damage 5, MTLB maximum damage 10, and it's amphibious. The reason why this matters is when you're trying to resupply troops that are across a river, or if you're trying to resupply troops very close to the front line or at the front line, but you don't want to lose these units, you know, you need to resupply them. You got a tank that's heavily damaged or a squad of infantry in a forest that's heavily damaged, and it's worth it to send in an MTLB to save them, right? This thing can take twice the damage as a regular truck, and it has armor. It's not much. It'll get pretty much one shot by any tank, right? or any AT weapon. But it's enough that it's not a total soft target, right? So when you're building a deck and you're choosing supply, I really would always recommend to at least have one card of MTLBs if you're playing as packed. And for the record, when I'm building this deck, everything I'm saying is specifically for if you're playing Warsaw Pact, because I simply don't play NATO. But most of this will apply for NATO as well. Just the specific unit-by-unit recommendations won't, obviously, because they don't use them. But I think NATO also has like a M113 supply, which is basically the same as this. Amphibious, you know, semi-armored, etc. So when you look down at the bottom, here I have Feldpost, right? Every nation has an equivalent of the Feldpost. We just call them FOBs. I would highly recommend putting a FOB in your deck. It's going to supply you with, I think, like 12,000 supplies, something like that. So you can only spawn this in at the start of the game, right? So you need to decide at the start if it's worth it to spawn this in. But I would always have one in your deck. Unless you're just like a really experienced player who, you know, your strategy is to like faggy douche rush them at the beginning or something. Okay, fair enough, you know? But if you're a new player, I'd highly recommend putting a Feldpost or a FOB or whatever your nation calls it in your deck. The next thing I would do, if you have anything like this available, because something to keep in mind in WARNO, if games get drawn out and you're using a significant amount of artillery, you're gonna run out of supply. And you're gonna run out a lot quicker than you think. There's actually a lot of decks in this game that are pretty limited simply by the amount of supply they bring in. And I've had people who are more experienced in the game tell me, you put too much in your logistics tab, you know? You get way too much supply. And maybe in competitive games or very small games like a 1v1 or a 2v2 with experienced players on certain maps, that could be true, right? Where you don't need a whole logistics tab just full of supply. But from the games I've played and the play style that I like, which is to advance incrementally with infantry and basically smash enemy positions with artillery before moving in, especially using RM70s and extremely supply-heavy units like that, I bring literally all the supply the game will let me bring. And that's one of the reasons why I like Berliner Gruppierung so much. Because you get 2 Mi-26s, right? So that's 6,000 supply each. That's a FOB worth, right? That one card there, that's an entire FOB's worth of supply. Get these Mi-8T munitions, 4 times 1,500. You know, that's another, what, 6,000? So now you're at 18,000. It's like 30,000 supply. That's absolutely insane, but I'm going to get even more. That's another 12,000 supply there between them, and then I'm just going to get MTLB munition. And again, if you're a more experienced player watching this, you're thinking, what the hell is this noob doing? And I understand, right? I completely understand why some people really, really do not recommend to logistics spam, but I logistics spam. That's my playstyle, and it works for me. That's how I played in Wargame Red Dragon. That's how I'm going to play here. It's worked well so far. We'll see at the end if we have enough to get another supply vehicle. But I want to be able to put other stuff in my deck before I go back and kind of evaluate availability here. So, for the playstyle that I show in my videos and the playstyle that I'm going to be building this deck around, you definitely want a lot of supply. A shitload of supply. As far as control vehicles go, so in this game, pretty much in any game mode you're playing, it's either going to be destruction, which is basically kill more enemies than you lose, right? Kill more stuff than you lose is destruction. Or conquest, where the goal is to seize points. You've seen this in some of my videos so far, if you want to go back and look at them. Where basically you're trying to secure capture points, and through passive income gained from these points, defeat the enemy with time, right? By not allowing them to hold these points. Now, in order to actually capture these points, you need command vehicles, and when you see one of these units, they'll always have a star right before their name. They'll be very recognizable once you have played the game for a decent amount of time. You'll be able to recognize command vehicles very easily. The star is very distinctive. As far as command vehicles in your logistics tab, I actually never use them. And maybe this is incredibly stupid of me, but I just don't use them. They're usually very soft, very easy to kill, right? And I just prefer infantry or tank CVs, honestly. I find them to be more durable, especially tank CVs, and frankly more useful. Because especially as we're going to see when we go later into this deck, something else you need to realize about command vehicles is they confer a veterancy bonus to all nearby units. And this is actually massive, right? This is massive. And we'll look at this when we look into the tank tab especially. If I bring this up with my tanks to up their veterancy, you know, try as I might, at the end of the day, it's a shitty BMP-1. It's going to get one shot by an Abrams, right? This thing is not durable. It's an incredibly soft vehicle, and the same goes for the BTR-50. And, you know, you're not going to bring an MI-9 up with your guys. So these have their uses. I'm not trying to say don't use logistics tab CVs. You can use them, but, again, especially for this deck, where you are going to be pretty limited in terms of your armor tab, I would just take tank CVs, and maybe an infantry CV, like a Wachschützen commander. We're going to look at that now. So here you have your infantry tab. So something you need to know about infantry is there aren't many one-size-fits-all infantry in this game, right? You really need to have different types of infantry for different scenarios. So for example, look down here at the Wachschützen. This is an excellent anti-infantry unit. You know, it's a shock unit, security, resolute. So this is a damn good unit. Wachschützen is a very good anti-infantry unit. And you get an RPO, which is like a thermobaric napalm RPG, basically. However, this squad doesn't have any anti-tank weapons at all. It can't engage enemy armor, effectively at least. Whereas you look at Motschützen, this squad does not have shock training, so they're not going to be as good against other infantry, and there's fewer men per squad, but you have an anti-tank weapon. So say you're pushing into a forest, right? Trying to clear out enemy infantry, and you're only using either Wachschützen or down here the Saperi RPO, which is very similar to the Wachschützen squad. It's just not quite as good, but it's very similar. No anti-tank weapon, you know, decent sized squad. If you're just pushing into a tree line with these sorts of units, and say there's enemy vehicles like M113s, or if you're fighting against Germany like the TPZ Fuchs, or even if they have like some cheap tanks, they're just going to absolutely shit on you because you don't have any way of killing them. So you just need to be aware that there are some units that are very, very strong, but you need to use them in conjunction with other units. I would never push up like 2 or 3 units of Wachschützen without some unit to support them that can kill an enemy tank. So that's just something you need to be aware of. Kind of conversely, I wouldn't build a whole deck of just like Motorstrelke or Motschützen or Fallschirmjäger. Although, if you were just going to build a deck of one thing, Fallschirmjäger would be the best. I mean, they're very, very good. My point in saying all of this is you need kind of a spectrum of various infantry units, more even than with other types of units, right? Like with tanks or stuff like that. With infantry, you really do need a diversity of units. So in this particular deck, you have a couple of very good choices. I mean, you're really spoiled for choice in Berliner Gruppierung. You get a lot of good units here. So when I was talking about infantry CVs, right, or infantry sort of command squads, this is what I mean. Is these units like this. like the Wachschützenführer. This is the command squad I really like to use in this deck. This is a 6-man squad, so it's rather large. You have an anti-aircraft weapon. I mean, it's shit, right? It's cheeks, but it is an anti-aircraft weapon. And even if it doesn't kill anything, you know, if this squad isn't spotted and you have an enemy heli trying to snipe your CV and it has a man-pad shot at it, it might just run off. Like, they might not, you know, think, oh man, that's a Wachschützen squad. No, they're probably just going to see a missile fly at their heli and just retreat their heli. I've seen that happen a lot of times. So even if you don't kill something, it's just good to have. So we're going to go ahead and put a card of Wachschützenführer in our squad. And that's going to be our infantry CV. We might put another infantry CV in here later. I'm going to get 2 cards of Wachschützen. I think this is just an incredibly strong anti-infantry unit. Really can't go wrong with them. Large squad. They do really well. So I'd recommend bringing 2 cards of Wachschützen. Then we're going to go down to our Fallschirmjäger here. Now, Fallschirmjäger are a little different. These are regular infantry squads in that they have anti-tank weapons, you know? And they're just more in line with your traditional infantry squad as far as their role, right? However, they have a couple of things that are extremely beneficial to them. One, they're special forces, right? You can see that, this little commando icon up here. It just means they're better all around. If a unit's special forces, it's just the best units in the game for infantry, right? And more importantly, I would say they're airborne. What this means is when you start a battle, I'm sure if you look at my past videos, you can see how reconnaissance gets forward deployed of, say, tanks, right? You can deploy them at the beginning of the battle further forward than tanks. The same is true of airborne. You can deploy them very far forward, which, if you're trying to seize an objective and fortify it, makes these excellent. So I always bring 2 cards of Fallschirmjäger and 1 Fallschirmjäger Metis. And the thing with a Metis is these squads situationally can be extremely strong. I have done some really stupid stuff with the Fallschirmjäger Metis. So something you need to pay attention to is the weapon ranges in the stat cards, right? So you look at the Fallschirmjäger. They have an RPG-7 VL, 18 penetration, you know, it's got to reload very quick. And, more importantly than anything else, if you're in a forest, this will still engage enemy armor. If you're up close against enemy tanks, this will still engage them to, like, point blank, right? That's not the case with the Fallschirmjäger Metis. So the Fallschirmjäger Metis has about 3 times the range. 1 less penetration. So this is really good for if you get an open field of fire, you can engage enemy tanks. And again, even if you can't kill like an Abrams from the front with a Fallschirmjäger Metis, you can stun him. It's going to deal suppression. So if you smack an Abrams with like 2 of these and bring up your tanks immediately, even if it's like a T-80B or something, you're going to have a big advantage there. It's not going to be hopeless. And if there's enemy infantry fighting vehicles like Bradleys or M113s or stuff like that, I mean, this shit's going to kill them. It's gonna wreck them, right? So I really like the Fallschirmjäger Metis. The Metis in general, I really like it. The Americans have a similar sort of thing with the M47 Dragon. Beyond that, I would just get some Wachschützen and maybe a Motostrelki Metis, but you might just want numbers at this point, you know? So I'm going to go ahead and get a card of Wachschützen in the BMP-1P. I'm going to get a card of them on Veteran. Then I'm going to get a card of Wachschützen in the BTR-70. That gives me 9 of them. I'm going to go ahead and get 2 cards, just so I have a mass of good infantry that I can throw in. So, something you need to recognize, it's what I was talking about at the beginning. You need a variety of different infantry. Because you look at the Fallschirmjäger, right? And I mean, like, these are just perfect. 8-man squads. They're going to do really well against infantry close up. And they're going to do well against armor if they get close up. However, you see this green number, you only get 4 of them per card, and you only get 2 cards. So you get a total of 12 Fallschirmjäger units, and 8 Wachschützen units, together with the CVs. So basically you have 20 really good infantry, and I mean really good infantry. That's really not enough. You need more than that, especially when you're playing Berliner Gruppierung, because it's a very infantry-heavy deck, right? You don't have a lot of armor, or a lot of other sort of assets that you can throw in. So that's why I'm adding these cheaper infantry at the end. The Mutschützen. So that's 18, 6. So what, we have 25 more. So that gets us to 45 infantry that we can call in. That's pretty good. You can, if you want, get also a heavy machine gun squad. And it's definitely good to have. I usually get just the Fallschirmjäger PKM. I know it's not a very strong unit, but it is a very cheap unit. And you can forward deploy it with your Fallschirmjäger and just beefs them up a bit. So I'm going to go ahead and throw that in there. We'll see if we can change that later or if we need to. So now we're going into the real bread and butter of this deck, in my opinion, and that's the artillery tab. It's really what separates this deck from, like, say, the 35th Air Assault Division, right? To me, this is why I prefer this deck, aside from the fact that Fallschirmjäger are better than VDP, in my opinion. You have a lot of artillery to choose from, and with the recent patch at least, this might change by the time some people watch this video, but in the current patch, RM70s are viable. They are very powerful. You just need to not overuse them, or else you're going to run out of supply very quickly. But if you build a 4-stack of these, and you catch a group of enemy vehicles or infantry, you're going to fucking annihilate them, or at least do severe damage to them. So I'm going to start out with 2 cards of RM70s, and these are just basic, mass saturation multiple launch rocket launchers. They're going to come with 2 reloads, and you're going to need to resupply them. Now you have an interesting choice here from here on out, because you got the real core of the artillery in this deck, in my opinion, which is the RM70s. Now you have to choose between a couple different things. You can either invest a ton into your artillery tab, which I wouldn't recommend. I wouldn't recommend for 2 reasons. One, there's other better units you want to bring besides artillery. And 2, even with the mountain of supply this deck comes with, the giant logistics tab that I'm bringing, you're still going to run out of artillery after about 20 or 30 minutes if you fill this tab up. I mean, it do be like that. So I would recommend, even though they're not the best, I would bring 2 cards of the 2 S3M Akatsias, because you need point fire artillery, right? Look at the RM70. Say you see an enemy CV, like just an enemy control vehicle, or an individual enemy unit, and you're pretty sure that it's alone. If you fire a barrage of RM70s, you're talking about literal thousands of supply, which is worth hundreds of points, right? I mean, hundreds of points to kill potentially a unit not even worth 100 points. You need to be aware of that. RM70s and these sorts of saturation artillery can be extremely useful, but you can't just shoot them at everything, right? And that's really where you want these Akatsias, because you can shoot them at everything. You really can't afford to shoot these at individual point targets. Even if it's just an infantryman, it's worth it. These are not as supply heavy, they're much more accurate, and you don't have to fire that many rounds to hit and kill a weaker target. So I'd highly recommend bringing 2 cards of Akatsias. And from here, I would bring 1 last artillery unit, and it's kind of up to you as to what it's going to be. It depends on the map, it depends on sort of how long you think the game's going to last, and where you're going to be fighting on that map. I mean, look, if you're going into a town, or a big forest battle where you know it's going to be overwhelmingly infantry in a condensed area, I would bring the TOS-1. I mean, this is going to absolutely decimate enemy units more than any other unit in the game, if you catch them in a cluster. The problem is it's very short-ranged. Very short-ranged. And it can be difficult to bring up to the front line in some maps. Also, it's very expensive. There's a 380 point artillery. The Oregon, well, it doesn't take nearly as long to reload, so you'll get more actual, shots out of it throughout the game. It has, it's super long range, right? It's 49,000 range. That's insane, right? 49,000 meters. It's basically going to cross-map anything. So the Oregon can be very useful, but it's not going to be like the TOS-1 where it can just absolutely annihilate anything it touches. To be honest, if you're a new player, I would recommend bringing the Oregon because it's a lot easier to use. It can do a lot of good work. It's not super supply heavy, honestly. 960 to supply this every time it shoots sounds like a lot, but that's 2 MTLBs worth. That's like 40 points worth of supply to shoot this each time. Each 16 rocket volley, right? Each salvo. If you use it well, you can get way more than 40 points out of this thing every time you shoot it. You just gotta pay attention. So that's what I do for artillery. You kind of got all your bases covered here. Except for mortars. And this is something that a lot of people will probably watch this and be like, why the hell aren't you bringing mortars? And this is just my personal preference. I really don't like towed artillery in this game. I really don't like it. Except for in the KDA deck. Because you just don't really have any other choices when it comes to tube artillery. At least nothing in volume. But when it comes to mortars, these can be incredibly useful. They can be incredibly strong. The problem I have with mortars like this is it either requires a shitload of micro, right? Where you basically have to manually load them back onto their transport truck and move them, unload them again, and fire them, which again, for a beginner especially, is that worth it? Also, with this much artillery, do you really need mortars? Look, man. I'm sure there's people a lot better than me who build Berliner Gruppe and put mortars in this deck, but for me, it's just overkill. Like, you have so much freaking artillery. If you're trying to hit an area target, and people be like, oh, mortars are really good for suppressing an area of infantry. Well, if you see an area of infantry, like, 4 or 5 infantry units in buildings, just fucking hit them with a 4 stack of RM70s. You'll do a lot more than suppress them. You'll probably kill like 400 or 500 points worth of shit. So just do that instead, No reason not to. Throw a dip in here. Yeah, in this deck I wouldn't use mortars. I really do like mobile mortars, right? Where they're on tracks, you can move them, keep them from getting killed, shoot and scoot. I love those things. And in every deck that has them, I use them. I don't really like the stationary infantry mortars because they're so easy to counter battery. Especially, if someone really is paying attention, they can counter battery these things easy as shit. And if you forget to move them after you shoot them, they're dead, right? They're fucking dead. Again, some decks don't have nearly as much artillery available as this deck, and the mortars can be extremely useful in that situation. In this particular deck, I would not recommend using mortars. We're going to go into the tank tab. And this is where a lot of interesting shit can happen. So, we don't have much here. You have a T-3485. That's a meme. They're not actually useless, to be honest. I know some people are watching through like, what the hell are you talking about? They're not actually useless. Frankly, I would bring T-55s instead. I'd bring T-55s instead if you were going for cheap tanks, which I'm not. But you know, 35 points for a tank. I suppose there is a usage for these if you're an absolute troll, but I'm not, so I can't think of much use for me. So the first thing we're going to go down to is we have 3 decent tanks in this deck. We have the T80 or T64 BVK. This is a command variant of the T64 BV. So T64 BV is a pretty good tank. We're going to go ahead and look at it. It's a pretty good tank. You have an extremely good gun-launched ATGM with 2,625 meters range. That's good. 21 penetration, that is phenomenal for a gun-launched ATGM. Very, very strong. But your actual cannon only does 17 penetration, which is not phenomenal. It's not phenomenal at all. But the good news is this. Penetration with the main gun on these sorts of tanks scales with distance, right? And why that matters is, at maximum distance, you're only getting 17 penetration, right? Which is kind of booty cheeks for a semi-expensive tank. The upside is, you have an ATGM that does 21. So, as long as you keep the enemy, put it this way, you have a danger zone with a T64 where you're at a severe disadvantage. And that danger zone is when the enemy is in range to shoot you. So, like say an Abrams is shooting at you from 2275, right? To where they're getting 19 penetration against you, or whatever, right? They're an Abrams, they have 19 or 21 pins, some shit like that. And you're stuck at 17. Or you're stuck shooting ATGMs at them, which is significantly slower, because you can't fire a new ATGM until the previous one is hit. And that takes time. You don't want to be stuck in that situation where you're 1v1ing an Abrams with a T64 when he's in range to shoot you. You really want to hit them, pop smoke, scoot out of the way, and hit them with something else. Or draw them close. If you get them close enough and they're already stunned, that 17 starts becoming more and more significant, right? Something to be aware of. ATGMs, RPGs, high explosive anti-tank weapons. And you can see, where is it? I mean, it says tandem, okay, fine. But basically, any sort of missile or rocket, as long as it's an armor-piercing rocket, is going to do the same damage at maximum range as it will at point-blank range. And that's very important. Because when you look at something, next we're going to look at this PAC MT-12. You look at something like this, 2,800 meters range with 18 penetration. You can engage a target with a lot of armor. So, okay, put it this way. I have this T-55 here, right? 14 penetration. If I see an Abrams at my maximum range of 2275, I can't even shoot at him. Because my penetration is so low, I can't do shit to that tank at that distance. So I'm going to have to actually close in with the Abrams to, I don't know, 1,800 meters to be able to actually shoot him. That's not the case for the MT-12, or with the T-64 BV, or even with the T-80B with the Cobra. When you have a gun-launched ATGM, you can fire from your maximum range at any target, and even if it won't kill them in one shot, it may do damage, it may stun them, it may even force their crew to bail out. You know, when you hit a tank with a heavy ATGM, it can do shit to them. It'll stun them, it will start suppressing them, it may scare them off. If you use this in conjunction with various units, you can kill extremely expensive tanks with sort of asymmetrical strategies. So in this deck, you don't get many tanks. I mean, look, we're talking about the lowest veterancy here. And something I want to show you about veterancy. So this is on trained, right? You see the stats. Accuracy 55%. I go up to elite, that turned into 60%. We're going to be shooting, you know, 0.3 seconds faster, which doesn't seem like it matters, but it fucking matters. It matters a lot. But now we're only getting 2 tanks instead of 6, and we already don't get many tanks in this deck. So I'm going to recommend something maybe controversial for specifically Berliner Gruppierung, and this also applies to 35Y. I'm going to bring them at the lowest possible veterancy. And this is risky, because if you don't use them in conjunction with a command vehicle, they're going to be a lot weaker than they should be, right? But this is why I was saying earlier, I like tank CVs. This is a command vehicle. It has great armor, or at least pretty damn good armor. It has a great HGM. It has serious combat value on its own, and you don't get many tanks in this deck, so you want to bring this anyway. And it's going to boost nearby tanks from trained to veteran, which is good. I mean, you don't need them to be elite. Elite is good, but if you get them to veteran, you're in the fight. You know, that's relevant. That's in the meta, so to speak. So you get a T64 BVK, T64 BV, T80B, all lowest veterancy possible. And I would highly, highly recommend to get a card of the MT12 Rapira. I fucking love these things. They have extremely good range. They're pretty cheap for what they can do. They're very stealthy. You can hide them in tree lines, use them to supplement your infantry. Use them to create kill zones where you can hit enemy tanks and then rush your tanks forward to finish them off. They're just very, very good, in my opinion. I really like them. So I would get them in the T813 transport rather than the MTLB. I like it. It's faster. It'll get them to where they need to go quicker. I would get... We'll see if we have enough to get 2 cards. If I can, I would like to bring 2 cards on Elite. Because with this particular unit... Okay, look with the T80B, right? Something you need to kind of know about these vehicles. I'm trying to remember if there's anything... Yeah, it says right here. On the tank gun. It's an auto-loader, right? So there's an auto-loading cannon. If I'm on the lowest possible veterancy... down here on the bottom right of the 2A46 tank gun, right? Rate of fire, 10. 10 shots a minute. If I boost that veterancy to elite, that shit don't change. Because it's an autoloader. It's a mechanical system. It doesn't matter how elite the unit is, it's not going to fire that faster. Whereas over here, the NSVT machine gun is firing faster, right? Well, you look at the MT12 Rapira. Look down here, 12 rate of fire for the cannon. And that's if you're firing, you know, anti-tank shells. And with the 9M117, the ATGM, you're getting six rounds a minute, so it can fire once every 10 seconds. You look at it on Elite, now you're firing 7, with 66% accuracy. Reloading time is very low. Or rather, not the reload time, but the aiming time, and that actually is pretty important with this, to get it as low as possible. I would recommend bringing your MT12s on Elite. That might just be me. It might seem kind of schizophrenic to be like, well, wait a second, you're going to bring all your tanks on the lowest veterancy, but then say a frickin' anti-tank gun's coming in an Elite. Yeah, it is a manual loader. These things can be incredibly powerful. You don't want them to get suppressed because they can't retreat, right? They can't retreat, they can't smoke. If they get engaged by something heavy, that's pretty much all she wrote, right? I would recommend bringing them on Elite so they can kind of give their best fight. We're going to look at Recon now. We might go back to tank if we have leftover slots available. So with Reconnaissance, right, you do have a couple of choices as far as what kind of direction you want to go down. You need to know with Recon, there's, in my opinion, 3 very important things. Cancel that. 4 very important things you want to pay attention to. The first one is how stealthy they are. Now you look at this Moat Grinzer here. Look on the bottom right. It says stealth exceptional. That's the best it gets, right? That's really good. You can't get better than exceptional. it's going to make it very hard for enemies to spot your recon, which is important, because you always need your recon to be at the edge of a forest or at a building facing the enemy. You need them to have a line of sight on the enemy to see them, right? Now, if you have a recon unit that isn't that stealthy, like, say, the SPW-40, they're going to be able to spot you. I mean, that's good. Good is still good. But when you go to the Aufklär BRM1, now you have mediocre. This thing's going to be really easy to spot, frankly. It's not going to be stealthy at all. If you have enemy with exceptional recon, they're going to fucking see this thing. So you might be wondering, well, why the hell would you ever bring a BRM1 or another big recon vehicle like this if it's so easy to spot? Well, because it gets exceptional optics. And exceptional optics are a big deal. I mean, the jump from very good to exceptional can be a massive game changer for you if you're able to spot his stuff, especially with this deck. And I can't stress this enough. This, in my opinion, is an artillery deck. It is a defensive deck. You need to reach terrain first, take it, bring in your anti-tank guns, fortify it with your infantry. If you got wood lines to your flanks, pump in the Wachschützen, pump in the, the Motschützen, get your infantry in there, fight out the battles there with your infantry. As far as enemy armor and enemy defenses go, you need to be like a fucking archer, right? Like a lancer against them, because you don't have as many tanks, right? You're not gonna have very strong air like Nighthawks or laser guided bombers that are gonna give you an upper hand to just wipe out an enemy push. You're gonna have to really play smart if you're facing up against a tank-heavy enemy. And there's a lot of NATO decks which are quite tank-heavy. I mean, even ones that you wouldn't think would, like just regular mechanized infantry divisions. They can have a shitload of tanks with them. So when you're looking at the BRM-1, if you're able to spot enemy vehicles moving, or enemies moving a tow launcher into a piece of terrain, these little things that you can do with exceptional optics that you might not be able to see with very good can literally change the entire game. So that's what I mean by there's some units where there's an opportunity cost, where they do things other units can't, but you have to use them right. I would always bring a BRM-1. Always bring a unit with exceptional optics, but you have to be careful with them, again, because they can be spotted much easier than infantry. If I sound silly, I threw a dip in, alright? Get over it. I'd bring one of them. I'd bring them at the lowest veterancy you can bring them. Next, we're going to move on to our Mot Razvedka, and I like to bring these guys in the BMP-1P, the Razvedka BMP, which is a recon vehicle on its own. You get good optics and mediocre stealth. It's not an exceptionally good recon vehicle, but it is a recon vehicle, and it has pretty good armament, right? I mean, it has a Fagot and a cannon and an MG. If you catch infantry in the open, this can force them to, fuck off, basically. I like this squad. It's not very strong. In any particularly amazing way. Personally, I'd bring 4 of them at veteran in the Razvedka BMP-1. So now we have a decent recon infantry squad with an anti-tank weapon, and that's important. And we have an exceptional optics vehicle. Now, what I like to do in this particular deck, some people may really like the Fallschirmjäger Scharfschütze, right? Because you can sneak them and bushwookie behind the enemy. If you can do that, by all means, frickin' do it, right? Because then you can arty their shit, and again, this is an artillery deck, in my opinion, at least the way I play it. If you can spot their stuff and kill it with artillery, by all means, use the Fallschirmjäger Scharfschütze. Personally, I use the Grenzer instead. It's a big 7-man squad. The reason why I like using the Grenzer is it's cheap, it's a large squad, they actually are decent against an enemy infantry, right? I mean, you have the resolute trait, so you take less suppression in combat. You have an MG, and you have, 6 AKs. It's not some amazing infantry squad, but it's cheap. You can use it, right? What I really would recommend using the Grenzer for is if you're pushing up with, say, Wachschützen or Motschützen in a forest, right? And you're going to push to the next tree line. Just throw a Grenzer in there with them. It's a 60-point unit. If you lose it, it's not the end of the world, because you're going to bring 9 of them at the lowest veterancy. I mean, why not? They're cheap. Who cares? And you can afford. They're expendable. They're both expendable, and it's a 7-man squad, so they're not going to die immediately, right? They can survive a little bit, which is important. So I would highly recommend getting a card of Grenzers at the lowest veterancy. Then we're going to move on to AA. What the? What has happened here? Oh, okay, I'm sorry. I got completely distracted looking at this. Okay, so with your anti-air tab, you actually get a very good anti-air tab in this game. Or in this deck, rather. But you have a choice. You really only have one meaningful choice in your AA tab. The rest of it is pretty much do this, right? Just straightforward advice. However, when it comes to your AA tab, you have a choice, and the choice is between the Igla and the Strela 2M. The Igla is superior in absolutely every way. It is way more accurate. 55 instead of 42. It goes up to 57 if you bring them on that veterancy. However, the thing with the Strela 2M is this is a Fallschirmjäger unit. So it's going to get the same forward deployment as the rest of your Fallschirmjägers will. That's absolutely massive. Because look at it. When do you really, really need AA? Like, I'm saying, do or die, you need anti-helicopter AA. It's if someone heli rushes you, right? And getting heli rushed at the start of the game can be an absolute game-losing thing. Like, you're fucked, right? You look at this, at the Strela 2M. You get a card of 5 of them. They're pretty cheap, right? They're going to be 50 points apiece. They did increase the price recently, but they're still pretty cheap. And you can bring these up and set them up like that. I mean, you can have them up there at the front and set them up at the same time the rest of your infantry are getting there. And again, if your opponent's throwing helicopters or, air mobile infantry or, an AH-1 to try to stop your push, and you already have man pads up, you can get, a 200 or 300 point, maybe a 200 point kill on attack heli, or several hundred points worth of infantry kill just by shooting them out of their fucking Hueys and, Blackhawks. I would always bring this. It's not as good as the Igla, but it can do something the Igla can't, and that's be at the front immediately. I'd bring these. On the lowest veterancy. Something to know about man pads also. And this is going to be one of those things that is a universal tip to anyone new to this game, regardless of if you're playing NATO, Warsaw Pact, whatever, right? You have 2 different types of AA. Well, okay, you have more than 2. But you have 2 different types of guidance for AA. You have infrared, and you have radar. Now, generally speaking, radar is going to have much longer range than infrared, right? Infrared's going to cap out at like 3 kilometers. Radar, some of this can go really far. The problem with infrared is it's not very good at actually detecting enemy aircraft, right? Because it doesn't have a radar. It's just point and shoot. Like a man pad like this, it doesn't have some mechanism to discover an enemy aircraft. You just see one flying and you shoot at it. The reason why this matters is you can't spot stealth aircraft with a frickin' man pads. Say there's a Nighthawk flying over. I think in my previous video, WARNO, I think it was WARNO 3v3 on Danger Hill's a Bucktastic battle. There was a point where my T-64 command unit was actually killed by a Nighthawk, and I commented, shit, I need to get radar AA up here because I can't kill him. I had a ton of AA up there, but none of it was radar, so I couldn't even see him. After I got radar AA up and he knew it, he never used that Nighthawk again because he didn't want to lose it on my side. He used it on other people, right? But there's a downside to radar, and the downside is this. Do I get one? Wow, now I look stupid. Okay. I guess Berliner Gruppierung does not get a seed plane. Okay. Say you see a plane that says SEAD at the end. SEAD, right? Suppression of Enemy Air Defense. If they fly that fucker in there, and you have, like, a book M1 turned on, the radar's turned on, they're gonna see it, and that unit is going to automatically shoot at you and kill you. Meaning, you need to know what type of AA you have. So when you look here, surface-to-air missile, radar, you need to pay attention to this. On the Kub, radar. On the Biryusa, radar. On the Shilka, radar. All these radar-guided AAs can be detected by enemy suppression of or SEAD planes, right? They can spot you, and if you leave your radar on, they can kill you. So the answer is you turn your weapon off. You know, when you're playing the game, on the bottom, you see your weapons. When you select a unit, you just left-click on it, it'll turn it off. But then you're like, okay, well, if I have my weapons turned off, how am I going to shoot enemy planes? You got to micromanage it. I mean, that's the shitty truth, but it's the truth. You got to micromanage it, you know? You have two choices. You either leave them on and turn them off when you see a seed plane coming in, but that requires serious micro. You gotta do it quick. Or you leave them off and turn them on when enemy non-seed planes are coming in. But that's risky because if you don't notice, you're not gonna kill the enemy planes, right? That's what you need to know about AA. With infrared, they don't have very good air detection. Like they're not going to do a really good job of actually spotting enemy airplanes coming in if they're stealthy. But they can't be taken out by anti-radiation missiles because they don't have a radar. And it's, you see here? Fire and forget missile. Oh, okay. Yeah, infrared. See right there, infrared. If they come in range, you're going to fire and there's nothing they can do about it. Right? They're not going to be able to take you out with a seed plane. If they're going to kill you, it's going to be with like counter battery, or not counter battery, but just artillery or something like that, you know? So that's why you want a tiered, layered air defense system. Because you think about it this way, right? If an enemy seed plane is trying to kill your units, it's going to need to fly towards those units to actually engage them. And say this Book M1, it has 6,000 meters range. You can put this thing 3,000 meters behind your front line, maybe even 4,000 behind your front line, although that's pushing it. And very close to the front, you can have Strelas, right? You can have Strelas, you can have Iglas, you can have these sorts of IRAAs. So when that enemy seed plane's flying over, you turn your Book radar off, you let your Strelas and everything else shoot at them. If they hit it, if they stun it, and if it starts evacuating and turns away from your Book, turn it on and hit him in his back, and you'll kill him. That's how you spoof seed planes, right? Or, better yet, if you have aircraft, like a MiG-31, with extremely long range, you can do that. This deck, unfortunately, does not have any really good air-to-air. I wouldn't even frickin' bring these, the MiG-23ML. And people would be like, dude, there's so many reasons why you would bring one. Okay, if we have a point left over, we'll bring them, if nothing else, to kill enemy helicopters. Because if you can kill an Apache for the loss of a MiG-23ML, to me that's worth it. Not necessarily in points. I mean, yes, you are going to make... you're not losing as many points as he is in that trade. But also because an Apache can kill a lot of your shit. I mean, they can dominate you. They can kill a lot of your stuff. So when we get to air, we'll look and see if we have enough points left over. But for now, we have our cheap man pads. Now we're going to get 2 cards of Strela 10Ms. These things are pretty inaccurate. The enemy's going to dodge a lot of their shots. So I'd bring 2 cards of those and 1 card of Book M1s. Then you have a choice. If you really want to invest hard in on area denial, you know, just no frickin' planes in the sky, bring a Coob. If you're more focused on helicopters, I would honestly bring an Igla, or maybe even, and I know people hate this thing, right? I've seen people in games criticize me for using this, saying, why are you using that shit AA gun? Look, this thing is cheap. It can engage infantry decently enough. I mean, it's not amazing, but it can do it. If you want behind the front lines air defense, you put 1 or 2 of these near your fob with like a Grinzer. That's going to do a lot to keep the enemy from killing your artillery, I'm telling you. I mean, I would certainly rather have 1 of these than 1 Igla. Because this is going to suppress enemy helicopters. It is a gun AA, right? It's going to suppress them. Alternatively, you could just bring a Shulka. I mean, it's going to do the same thing but better, but it's also 80 points. I mean, do you really want these sitting around the map doing nothing, right? Personally, people can shit on me for it. I actually like these things. I think they have a usage. And I think their usage is in sticking them around the map to keep the enemy helicopters from getting around your flanks. And for that, I like to bring them. But you don't need that many of them. Elite doesn't give you that many benefits. I would bring them in Elite anyway, because you don't really need many of these. They're kind of cheeks. And then I get a big 23. Alright, so now we're in sort of a conundrum because we don't have any room for helicopters, despite the fact that Mi-24Ps are pretty damn good. I mean, they're pretty good helicopter. You kind of want these. So we gotta get rid of something. We can't afford to lose any tanks. We really can't afford to lose any recon. We could afford to lose the artillery, but that's also our gimmick in this deck. We really don't want to get rid of any supplies, so what can we get rid of? Well, we have these. Get rid of them, that gives you 2 points. Now you get 2, or rather 1 Mi-24. If you were willing to sacrifice the MiG-23, you could get another. So now we have 1 point left. What can we afford with 1 point? Nothing. Nothing except an aircraft. But you don't really have that many good aircraft. I mean, you have this. That can kill very expensive enemy tanks. But you don't have any suppression of enemy air defense weapons, right? You don't have any seed planes. So this is very risky to use. It's tricky, right? You don't need napalm or HE or any of that. Again, you have a mountain of artillery that can do that for you. It's really, in my opinion, the only thing that's useful here is an anti-tank weapon, right? An anti-tank plane. But again, without a seed plane and without effective escort planes, right? You don't have Su-27s, you don't have F-15s, you don't have F-16s, you don't have anything to bring with this to engage enemy aircraft in the sky. I mean, the MiG-23s, they have trash range, right? They have 3,000 meter range. So that doesn't really count, in my eyes. This is a heli hunter to me. I use this to hunt helis. That's it. Really what you're going to be looking at is the Su-22AA. And you know what? I usually wouldn't bring it, but if I want to bring another Mi-24, which I think is a lot more useful, honestly, I would have to get rid of these MiG-23s, and I don't want to get rid of these MiG-23s. So I'm going to bite the bullet, and I'm going to get it. So we're going to call this Test Deck. So when you look at this, you see that we have only 4 command vehicles, and that is my big weakness here. I don't have a lot of command vehicles. If you are in a 1v1, this is too few CVs in my opinion. I would change this deck around. If you're planning on doing 1v1s against experienced players, I would add another infantry CV. Whether it's, I would really recommend adding a Fallschirmjäger CV. Get rid of this PKM team, put a CV in there. I'm not going to do that though, because I usually do 2v2s, 3v3s, and when I do 1v1s, I really try hard not to lose all my CVs. But if you're new, and if you're going to be doing 1v1s against more experienced players, I really would recommend getting a frickin' another CV. Alright, now we have created this deck. We're going to go into a battle with it, and in the next video I'm going to show you how I'm going to play with this deck. It might be a couple of days before I can get some good footage to show how I like to use the various things in it, but I hope this has been helpful to understand some basic things. I'm going to be doing more tutorial videos that are a lot more hands-on and direct as far as showing you in actual gameplay how this stuff works. But I hope this has conveyed at least how I like to build my decks in WARNO. Thank you for watching.